"Is there room for Grandma and Grandpa in the new house?" my daughter asked from the back seat. I blinked, confused. "Why do you ask, sweetheart? Did someone say something?" She just giggled and hugged her penguin like it was the funniest thing in the world. At the time, I had no idea that one innocent question would set off a series of events that would flip my entire life upside down. My name is Catherine, and I'm 30 years old. Our little family consists of 3 people. There's my husband Ryan, who is 35, and our sweet 3-year-old daughter, Ella. For the longest time, Ryan and I had been talking about creating a home that felt safe and comforting, a place that would be our private haven. Whenever I talk about it, I sense people assuming I must have been on cloud 9, brimming with joy, or that others might have envied me. In reality, however, it was far from perfect. My head was spinning from the stress of working on the new house, while also dealing with Ryan's parents, who had a knack for sticking their noses into everything. It all started to go downhill on a day when we left Ella with my in-laws. Because Ryan and I both work full-time, our only real chunk of free time is on weekends. Those weekends were devoted almost entirely to scoping out potential properties and finalizing house plans. Normally, we dropped Ella off at my parents' place, since they live nearby and Ella grows fussy if we drag her along to check out real estate. But one morning, my father took a bad fall and ended up in the hospital. No way could he watch Ella that day. I seriously thought about canceling all our plans. Then Ryan suggested we ask his parents to babysit, even though I'd never been comfortable around them. They're blunt to the point of rudeness, their worldview feels outdated, and I hated the thought of inconveniencing them at the last minute. Still, we were in the middle of a tight schedule for the new house, so I reluctantly agreed for that day alone. Hoping to soften the tension, I even brought some fancy pastries as a goodwill gesture before we dropped Ella off. That evening, when we picked up our daughter, Ryan's parents were surprisingly pleasant. I assumed it was because of the sweets. As we drove home, Ella piped up from the back seat. "Is there a room for Grandma and Grandpa in the new house?" I asked. "Sweetie, why do you ask? Did they mention something?" She just giggled, hugged her plush penguin, and went right back to entertaining herself. Since Ella often heard me call my parents Mom and Dad, she started doing the same, even though she knew they were her grandparents. It sometimes led to confusion, especially compared to how she consistently referred to Ryan's parents as Grandma and Grandpa. At first, I assumed she was simply curious about whether we planned a spare room for them. Little did I know her innocent question would spark a whole chain of complications. From that day on, Ryan's parents started dropping by more and more, both in the evenings after we got home from work and on weekends when we were trying to rest. At the time, we were living in a cramped, slightly run-down rental apartment while saving up for our dream home. His parents would seat themselves on our lumpy sofa and insist on poring over the blueprints for the house we were building. Before I could protest, Ryan was already eagerly flipping through pages and discussing every tiny detail. It irritated me to no end. Why couldn't they leave our business alone? It wasn't long before Ryan's mother acted as though she were interrogating me at a congressional hearing. "Catherine, listen here," she said firmly, jabbing a finger at the layout. "This kitchen is in the wrong spot. You'll have to move it. And you definitely need more bedrooms. One child's room won't cut it if you decide to have more kids. Plus, you'll want space to relax as you get older." When I finally got a word in, I answered sharply. "Ryan and I have already discussed every detail. The construction is underway. Changing the plan now isn't possible." But she didn't stop there. She started lecturing me on furniture, appliances, and the importance of each space, boasting about how many friends' homes she'd visited and how certain she was that our design would never feel cozy. It was like being bitten by a swarm of gnats, impossible to ignore and entirely maddening. Jokingly, though I was half serious, I mentioned that maybe we ought to turn the place into a multi-generational home to share costs. Her reaction was immediate. "How dare you expect us to fork over money for your house?" she snapped. In truth, I despised the idea of living with any parents under one roof. It felt like a guaranteed recipe for constant conflict. After she stormed off that evening, I felt a brief surge of relief and reminded myself that these weren't my parents. I had no obligation to placate them beyond the bare minimum. Later that night, after Ella was asleep, Ryan scolded me. "Stop being so distant with my mom and dad," he said. "They only want to help." I fired back. "I'm not trying to be rude, but they come over unannounced, act superior, and meddle in every detail of our house." Undeterred, Ryan responded, "It's normal for parents to advise their children. You need to show them more respect. You should think about how you're behaving." With that, he turned away, making it clear he didn't want to argue further. I couldn't fathom why their interference seemed perfectly acceptable to him, especially when we'd had no financial support from them. I tossed and turned that night, furious at what I perceived as a complete injustice. Eventually, our new home was finished, and we were excited to move in, hoping that once we settled, things might calm down. But to my surprise, a new issue surfaced right away. Without any prior discussion, Ryan suddenly announced that my parents would be moving in with us. Apparently, he planned for them to occupy 2 upstairs bedrooms, with the larger one for my father and the smaller for my mother. I was stunned because we had never even mentioned living with my parents, much less giving up the room Ella was supposed to have. When I questioned him, he waved it off, saying, "They've already checked out the rooms. It's all good." In utter disbelief, I asked him when this was decided. He casually replied that it happened the day before our final inspection and that he'd even lent them the keys so they could take a tour. He spoke as if none of it was a big deal. Why would I suddenly need to share my brand new house with my parents if we hadn't planned on that? Overwhelmed, I stormed upstairs, locked myself in, and tried to steady my spiraling thoughts. I was grateful that Ella was still in daycare, so at least she didn't have to witness this argument. That afternoon, exactly as Ryan had vaguely warned, his parents showed up in a moving truck jammed with their belongings. They barged in like they owned the place, skipping polite greetings entirely, and started complaining that we should hurry up and finish packing. Their actions were brazen, as though this new house was automatically theirs too. Feeling pushed to the limit, I confronted them, standing by the front door. "Dad, Mom, I was never informed you were moving in with us. I'm actually shocked I'm speaking calmly right now." My father-in-law turned on me, shouting, "We already cleared this with Ryan. Why is that a problem?" I replied that it was definitely a problem, since I had only learned of it that morning, and I had absolutely no intention of cohabitating. Ryan, clearly uncomfortable but still siding with them, tried to diffuse the tension by insisting everything was just fine. Then he added, "Is it right for a wife to disobey her husband like this?" I seethed with anger at how readily he labeled me the disobedient daughter-in-law. We were our own family now, and I couldn't stand that sense of entitlement, especially after I'd shelled out all the money for the house without so much as a dime from them. As the commotion continued, they began carrying boxes inside, barking orders and treating the house like it had been theirs all along. "Come on, let's get this unpacked quickly," his mother called out, as if she were organizing a family move everyone had agreed to. They couldn't even be bothered with a normal greeting. Their behavior left no room for doubt. This wasn't a temporary visit. They fully intended to move in. Fed up and unable to stay silent any longer, I stood firm and repeated, "I wasn't told anything about this. I never agreed to live with your parents, and this is not okay." That's when Ryan's father snapped, "We've already spoken to our son, so stop causing trouble. If you can't accept it, maybe it's time you and Ryan got a divorce." He spat out that last word, divorce, as though it were a weapon. But it was exactly what I'd been dreading. And deep down, had already accepted as inevitable. "Then let's do it," I said coolly, as if the idea didn't rattle me in the slightest. A part of me even wished I had my phone recording in that moment, just to capture how calmly I delivered the words. Without raising my voice, I continued, "Go ahead and repay the $350,000 I provided for building this house. And don't forget, you'll be responsible for the mortgage going forward." Their expressions went blank with shock. I clarified, "Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Ryan didn't put in a single cent toward the purchase. The house is in my name, and I had him sign a loan agreement for exactly this reason." Ryan's parents were stunned, and my husband's face drained of color as I added, "We always earned equal incomes, but he never saved. I paid for everything, and you all knew that from the beginning." Ryan stumbled over his words, trying to push back. "But you agreed to everything, didn't you?" I looked at him, unmoved, refusing to let him twist the truth or guilt me into staying silent. Shaking with anger and heartbreak, I gathered Ella's belongings, including her beloved penguin, and then quickly packed up my own essentials. I loaded everything into my car and left. On the way, I picked Ella up from daycare and drove to my parents' house, still wearing the casual tracksuit I'd thrown on that morning. My parents looked alarmed when they saw me lugging all those bags, but they didn't hesitate to say I was welcome to stay. They told me not to worry, and I felt a wave of relief. Later, I learned that my parents had been petrified I might do something drastic in my distressed state. I assured them I'd never do anything to put Ella in danger, that I would guard her more fiercely than anything. That night, I told my parents how I planned to divorce Ryan and that I wanted full custody of my daughter. They immediately vowed to support us however they could, offering to let us stay as long as we needed, which was a huge comfort given my busy work schedule. That same night, I meticulously wrote down every detail of what had gone down with Ryan and his parents. I transferred recordings from my phone to my computer, making multiple backups. Over the next few weeks, I visited several law firms until I found a reliable attorney who agreed to take my case. About a week after I left, my life grew more frantic. One evening, my husband was waiting outside my office building as I finished work. Legally, we were still married, although my heart considered him my ex-husband. He asked if we could talk, and I agreed, but only in a public cafe. I switched on the recording feature on my phone under the table and asked calmly, "What did you want to discuss?" Looking disheveled and exhausted, my husband said he wanted to transfer ownership of the house to me so we could forget the matter of $350,000 altogether. I told him that I no longer wanted that house at all, especially since his parents had basically barged in first. "That's ancient history," he claimed. "There's no point dwelling on it." But as I watched him, hair untidy, face unshaven, suit rumpled, it was obvious he was near the end of his rope. He pleaded with me, "I can't repay such a huge sum overnight. You knew that when you loaned it to me, and remember how you insisted the place be in your name? I only suggested we share the deed, but you refused. I thought I was supposed to be the head of the household. I was bluffing about the divorce. I never thought you'd actually go through with it. I love Ella. I can take care of her just fine. Don't take her away from me." I set down my coffee and said calmly, "I'm completely serious about the divorce. I can't live with your irresponsibility, and I definitely won't live under the same roof as your rude parents." His desperation grew, but I cut him off, telling him I had to go pick up Ella. The way he talked about caring for her left me with an uneasy feeling. When I got back to my parents' house that evening, I asked them to stay vigilant in case Ryan or his folks tried to grab Ella without warning. Within days, the daycare director told me that 2 people matching my in-laws' description had tried to see Ella. I rushed out of work, sped to the daycare, and found them there, caged in a separate room to keep them away from my child. The second I walked in, they started screaming, "Thief! You stole our granddaughter!" Outraged, I demanded to know what on earth they were talking about. They accused me of fraud, wondering how a woman my age could possibly have enough money to fund a house. I calmly explained that I'd earned and saved that money myself, and that I'd also received gifts from my parents and an inheritance from my grandmother. Ryan's parents fell silent, having no real comeback, especially since they'd never contributed anything financially. Ending the conversation, I told them I was divorcing Ryan and that Ella would be staying with me. I then gathered my daughter and we left, but that wasn't the end of their intrusions. They continued turning up, sometimes clutching my arm, sometimes spewing insults. I recorded everything on my phone. A month later, with my attorney's help, I presented Ryan with solid evidence and documents outlining both the loan repayment and the divorce settlement. He balked only when it came to giving up custody of Ella. Once I threatened to demand further compensation if he kept resisting, his face went pale. Ultimately, I secured repayment of my loan and full custody of Ella before we finalized our divorce. The repayment stretched on much longer than I'd hoped. Ryan's plan was to sell the new house to pay me back, but it took ages to find a buyer at a reasonable price. Their family didn't have enough savings, and selling his parents' old property fell short of the total they needed, so they ended up slashing the home's asking price multiple times. Eventually, they sold it for far less than expected, and Ryan had to borrow additional funds from a bank just to clear everything. He lost the house, took on a mountain of debt, and ended up moving back into his parents' old, cramped place. His divorced sister returned to live there as well, bringing along her 2 teenage sons. So I heard rumors about 6 adults constantly fighting under one tiny roof. In time, I realized that family was so entangled in its own problems, they wouldn't be bothering me anymore. Fast forward 4 years, and Ella is now a bright second grader. We live in a cozy rental near my parents, which works out perfectly whenever I have to work late. She can spend those evenings with them, and we enjoy quality time together. Sometimes, we take trips to my parents' vacation home in Hawaii during school breaks, making happy memories I once thought impossible. Though I believed I'd stay single forever, life had other ideas. I've started seeing someone, a 36-year-old divorced dad with a first-grade daughter. We crossed paths often at daycare and gradually got to know each other. Lately, the 4 of us have been going out together, both our girls and the 2 of us, and it feels like a new start. One day, Ella innocently said, "Can we build a house where each of us has our own room and maybe even get a dog?" It caught me off guard, because just days prior, my new partner had actually proposed to me. I hadn't formally responded, but deep in my heart, I already knew the answer. Hugging Ella close, I whispered, "Yes. If we can make it happen, let's build a home for everyone, one where we can all be truly happy."